On this week's 51%, we speak with Claudia Coenen, a certified grief counselor and thanatologist, about how to navigate grief during the holiday season.
Allow yourself to feel, allow yourself to tell stories, and if you're overwhelmed, allow yourself to take a break. I just think it would really be nice for bereaved people if everybody could just be a little more sensitive.
We also hear from the executive director of No Kid Hungry New York about the state of food insecurity in the U.S. I'm Jessie King. It's all up next on 51%.
I was standing around like one of those girls I had seen in a movie. The whole world was a movie back then. I had my sunglasses on, I wanted to be seen without seeing shy Lolita. I wasn't really in it, I didn't really get it.
You're listening to 51%, a WAMC production dedicated to women's issues and experiences. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jessie King. The holiday season can be an especially rough time of year for a lot of reasons. I mean, by itself, preparing for the holidays is stressful. As of the taping of this show on December 21st, I still need to do about 60% of my holiday shopping. But there's also this overwhelming amount of pressure to be happy. You know, it's the most wonderful time of the year when everyone's bringing you tidings of comfort and joy and all of that. Life doesn't really cooperate with the seasons, though, or fit into our schedules. So there's a lot of people out there right now who I imagine might be struggling to make ends meet, or who are battling depression or another mental illness, who are mourning the end of a relationship or grieving a loved one. So on that note, today we're going to be talking about grieving through the holidays. And if there's one thing you take away from today's show, I hope that it's okay to not be happy, or to not be okay. If you feel you're in crisis and need someone to talk to, know you're not alone, the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available by texting 988 or online at 988lifeline.org. Our guest today is a certified grief counselor and thanatologist from Hudson, New York. Through her practice, the Karuna Project, Claudia Coenen helps bereaved people navigate their loss in a variety of ways. Coenen says she came to the practice after losing her first husband about 18 years ago and realizing that, as a society, we are not really good at grieving. She's since written multiple books on the subject, and her latest is Seasons of Grief, Creative Interventions to Support Bereaved People. Coenen is also a big proponent of using creative outlets to process your emotions, and she's developed multiple guides and creative prompts to help people get started. When it comes to the holidays, Coenen says it's important to prepare yourself emotionally, just as you might prepare yourself physically, or prepare the house physically. And she was willing to share some of the tools in her toolkit with me.
I have what I like to call the ABCs of grieving through the holidays. A is for attending to your needs. So really paying attention to what you think you feel, what you want to do, what maybe everybody's telling you that they want it to be exactly the same as it was when that person was alive, and you're just not sure that you can pull that off. So really listen to yourself and see what you need. Ask for help if you need it. Allow yourself to feel and allow yourself to talk about that person. Bring that person up, because oftentimes people around a grieving person are sort of afraid to mention their name because they think, oh, that's going to make them upset, not recognizing the person's already upset. So allow yourself to feel, allow yourself to tell stories, solicit help. And if you're overwhelmed, allow yourself to take a break. So those are some of the A's that you can do. B is for breathe. And that's the only one, because when you start to feel overwhelmed, come back to your breath. You can breathe in on a count of 4, hold for a little bit, breathe out on a count of 6, or whatever kind of breathing technique is going to help you get grounded. And C is for making choices. So there again, choosing whether you would like to go to grandma's house, or you want to make that fancy dessert that you always used to make, or whatever the choice might be. Take a look at your options and make some choices about what you think you can do. You might need to compromise a bit because there's other people around you, and you can make some choices about how much compromise you can make. You can communicate all of those needs that you have and what you'd like to do. And so those are 3 C's. And there's a secret one, which is that if it really just feels awful, you can just cancel everything.
That's a pretty comforting thought, I think. You know, it's nice to know that it's okay to walk away if you need. There's no pressure that, everything has to come together.
Right, but it's really good to communicate that to the people around you who are maybe asking you to do more than you think you're ready to do. And sometimes we need to push ourselves a little bit, like step a little bit out of our comfort zone. That's okay too, but but make sure that you have an escape plan, or that you've located where the bathroom is so you can go hide for a little while if you need to have a weep. Or you have somebody who's sort of tracking you and can say, hey, do you need a glass of water? Do you need a hug? Do you need to take a little break? So you might choose to compromise what you really think you need and do a little bit more for the other people that are still alive and that love you, but communicate what really works for you.
If you have a friend or loved one who is grieving this holiday season, how do you recommend that they talk to them? How do you approach someone in a way that's not going to upset them or I guess make them uncomfortable? Because, talking about death and grieving is not something that I think a lot of us are accustomed to, and, maybe a lot of us overthink it.
We're really terrible at it. And it's something that people in my field are really actively advocating for us to be able to talk about it even more, and to be comfortable with it. I mean, if somebody is hurting, say if somebody's sick, you don't think, oh, I can't go talk to them, or I can't bring them a cup of soup or something. You respond if you care about them. And why can't we do that when somebody's grieving? If we don't know what to say, then you can just say that. I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. It can be really simple, and probably leave the cliches out, because those usually are not very helpful.
What would you consider to be some of those cliches?
He's in a better place was one that really, really bothered me. I've encountered a couple of people that find that comforting, but most bereaved people don't like that very much. Like when my first husband died, the idea that he was in a better place instead of being here with us in our family in the middle of our lives made no sense. It just made me angry. There's those kind of things that people say that are just not particularly helpful. And we know that they mean well, but it's better not to say anything if you're not sure. Say something like, can I take a walk with you? Would you like me to just sit here with you? Or tell me a story about your loved one. Tell me something funny that happened around the holidays. Invite them to share with you, and that will be very helpful.
Well, on the other side of things, and this might be a pretty broad question, so I'm sorry, but outside the holidays, what does grief look like? Like, is there a right and wrong way to grieve? How do you do the work of healing through that?
Well, it's on the one hand, it's very unique to each person, but there are certain commonalities that people experience. A lot of sadness and very heavy emotion, and emotions that change a lot from one thing to another. It can be very unruly and messy. Some people try to be very stoic, and then they fall apart because you can't really hold on to that for very long. People get angry. People feel afraid that something else really bad will happen. There's so many different emotions. And so the way to get through it is to recognize that you're going to be feeling very unsettled, to allow yourself to feel those feelings, to again, this is sort of the same thing as the ABCs. Ask for help. Find a friend or a loved one that you can talk with. Come to a counselor, someone like me who really understands grief and can help you through it. I recommend all kinds of creative techniques. Journaling your way through can really help, but it's going to take time. And the other thing that our society does not recognize is that we think we're a very fast-paced view in our culture, and we think that you have something bad happens and you process it and then you're done. And grief is not like that. Grief feels very, very heavy for many people in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And it isn't so much that it gets lighter, it's that we develop the muscles to hold it in a different way.
You're a big proponent of using creative outlets to process your emotions too. And I've talked with women on the show who have used poetry to navigate sort of like the emotional toll of infertility. I've heard from women who have used music to explore their feelings and help their children with their memory. So there really is so much power to it. What are your go-to creative outlets, and what would you recommend to anyone trying to get started?
So poetry, journaling, prompts. Now, so I developed a deck of cards that started out as journal prompts because I was always recommending to my hospice clients to journal. And many people would say, well, I don't know where to begin. So I began with a series of questions or little statements that they could then use to prompt them into journaling. And then that became a deck of cards that also include suggestions for collage, suggestions for walking in nature, making a mindful cup of tea, a lot of different things, varied things that can really help you. And I recommend that people shuffle the cards and choose one. And if they don't like it, they can choose a different one. So that's one thing. And there are other types of tools like these, like the Karuna cards. There are other prompts. A friend of mine, Heather Stang, who's a yoga grief therapist, has a beautiful guided journal that has prompts in it and really takes you through your grief process. So those kinds of things are very helpful. I have a book called The Creative Toolkit for Working with Grief and Bereavement, and that has worksheets in it with suggestions on how to use them. It's written geared more towards practitioners, but it can be used by anybody. And I use a lot of in my office and with my work, I use a lot of artistic kind of tools. You know, there are many art therapy techniques that are very helpful, expressing yourself through color and shape. You know, if you have a really strong feeling inside your body, taking crayons and scribbling that feeling out on the page, not worrying about what it looks like. It's not about making a piece of art. It's about processing the feelings and getting them out of your body and onto a page.
You've got a new book on this subject too, right?
I do, and I'm very excited about it. It's called Seasons of Grief, Creative Interventions to Support Bereaved People. And in this book, I actually invited 17 colleagues who are art therapists, somatic therapists, end-of-life doulas, thanatologists. There's a music thanatologist in there. And everybody wrote their own creative technique. There's a nature therapist in England who wrote 4 chapters because the book is framed through the seasons. So she wrote a chapter for each season, and she describes the nature therapy that she does with her clients, walking on the beach or in the marsh or in the forest. The book also contains poetry. You mentioned poetry as a really good way of expressing your feelings. So the book contains poetry and art. So that I'm hoping that when people open the book, there's a sense of creativity in the way that you might approach the book as well.
Well, before we go, I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about grieving with young ones during the holidays. You know, a lot of people want to make the holidays magical for their kids, and that's kind of in opposition to grief. How do you, 1, recommend talking about death and loss with children, and 2, plan for what might be the first holiday without a loved one with kids by your side? You know, do you try to keep everything the same, or do you make new traditions and find ways to make tributes to that loved one?
It's really important to be very honest with children and also to really listen to them. What is it that they need and what do they want? So how would they like to bring that person? For instance, my kids, they lost their father. They were 14, 17, and 20 at the time that he died. And they told me very specifically they wanted Christmas to be exactly the same as it had always been. And that was very hard for me, but I did my best to try to do that. But they wanted to have the traditional foods that we had. They wanted to have the way that we decorated, the things that we did. And, you know, if they were younger, I might have asked them, you know, is there something you want? Would you like to draw a picture for dad? Would you like to write something to him or say something about him? So those are things that we can do with children. We also, one thing that I want to say about grief and children is that adults tend to think that children are going to express their grief in the same way that adults do. And that's not true. And sometimes children might become very silly or laugh or just not cry, and then the adults will say, well, what's wrong with them? They're not crying, they're not grieving. And we have to sort of meet the child where they are developmentally, and it may look very different than the way an adult is processing it. It also depends on the kind of relationship that you had with the person. Your family history of how they dealt with emotion is going to influence how you're going to be grieving. And all of those different factors are important. And they show up in the way that people process their grief. And the kids are no different. You know, that's the same. They're going to respond. They're also, kids often look at the parents and say, oh, you know, she's going to be really upset if I start crying, mom's going to be upset. And so we have to kind of let the kids know that it's okay to express their grief and give them some outlets to do that.
Well, Claudia, thanks so much for joining us today. You know, is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with before we go?
I just think it would really be nice for bereaved people if everybody could just be a little more sensitive.
Claudia Coenen is a certified grief counselor and thanatologist with the Karuna Project in Hudson, New York. Her latest book is Seasons of Grief, Creative Interventions to Support Bereaved People. She'll actually be having a book release party on January 30th at Oblong Books and Music in Rhinebeck, New York. You can learn more about that and Claudia's work at thekarunaproject.com. Claudia, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jessie.
The holidays are a big time for giving and volunteering, especially at local food banks. Our next guest, however, has been keeping her eye on this summer. Summertime can be the hardest time of year for families who are food insecure, as they're no longer able to rely on school meals to keep children fed. In New York, Rachel Sabella says a new federal program could provide roughly $200 million in summertime food aid to families across the state, but lawmakers need to act fast if they want to see it. Sabella is the executive director of the New York chapter of No Kid Hungry, a national campaign advocating and raising awareness of food programs across the U.S. Ahead of the new year, Sabella joined leaders from about 80 organizations across New York State in sending a letter to Governor Kathy Hochul urging the Democrat to opt into the summer program by its January deadline and allocate the required funding in her next budget.
Eligible families, eligible children would receive $40 per month in the summer months on a EBT card that they could take to a farmer's market, they could take to a local grocery store to purchase those meals. This benefit is paid for 100% by the federal government. All New York State has to do is to pay 50% of the administrative costs. The federal government will cover the other 50%. What's so time sensitive is New York needs to opt into this program by January 1st in order to implement it for summer of 2024.
So when you say there are administrative costs, how much are those exactly? What would the state of New York be contributing?
So for the administrative costs, we're looking at approximately $20 million. So for New York State to invest $20 million, they would in return receive approximately $220 million in federal funds that would go to addressing child food insecurity. It's a game changer, and it's something New York needs to do now to help families.
Have you spoken with the governor on this or heard anything from the administration that suggests that this will be in the budget next year?
We are continuing conversations with the Hochul administration, but as a longtime advocate, I want to see those numbers in writing. And once we see it, whether it's part of State of the State, whether it's part of the budget release, we will feel better. But I have a duty as a New Yorker and as an advocate for these programs to continue to raise our voice. And, we hope that we will see New York participate in this program.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about food insecurity nationwide. What is the state of hunger and especially child hunger in the U.S. right now? I guess, how have things changed since the pandemic?
Child hunger is on the rise across the country. In the last year, child hunger rose 44%. It went from 1 in 8 children to 1 in 5 children. So we are seeing this drastic rise. We know families are struggling to put food on the table, but we also know there's many things we can do to address this and to reverse this trend and help people. But we're seeing the numbers skyrocket, and it has me very concerned.
What resources and tools do we currently have available to combat food insecurity?
Number one is we have safety net programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. That's a grocery benefit for eligible families. So how can we make sure people are enrolled and we're protecting programs like that? School meals in New York right now, it is even easier for districts, thanks to some government funds, to provide meals at no cost to kids. For some families, this is a huge relief. Children can have access to a no-cost breakfast and no-cost lunch. Programs like WIC, there are so many options out there, but we need to protect them. And we also need to bring back some programs that sunsetted in the pandemic.
All right, so when you say those programs fell through, what were they exactly? What did those do?
The first action was the expansion of the child tax credit. That helped families put food on the table, pay their bills, but that expansion ended. So we want to see that come back and to be permanent. We saw the pandemic EBT program, which provided families with a grocery benefit when they couldn't get to their school building to pick up meals. That helped them put food on the table. And that also helped local businesses because that money was being reinvested in local communities. We also saw a lot of flexibilities in programs. It was easier for families to pick up meals, take a few days worth of meals at home in the summer months. So we learned a lot, and we want to see so many of those provisions and programs come back.
I think the common perception anyway is that the holidays are a really big time for giving. You hear a lot about people organizing food drives, volunteering at soup kitchens, food pantries, and so on during the month of December. And that's also because, it can be a pretty tough time for people. Would you say from your experience that that's true? Is this a particularly big month to work on this? And is this where we see a lot of the effort going into food pantries and things like that?
I think it's an interesting question. To start on the data front, we know that families are struggling. We did a poll in 2023 at No Kid Hungry and found that 2 in 5 New York families are experiencing signs of food insecurity. 3 in 4 New Yorkers that responded also reported that it was harder to afford groceries this year than last. We all see the costs rising. And for those facing food insecurity, this is real. They're skipping meals. They're buying less food or buying less healthy food. They're looking for additional support. So we know New Yorkers are generous. We know that they are making donations of food and of funds to emergency food providers. We know they're volunteering, but it's going to take more than that. And that's why it's so important for people to raise their voice and for us to see significant policy changes, because that also ensures that people are treated with dignity, that they can have choice on the foods that they're providing with their families, and that they're able to make those decisions and to also support businesses in their community while they're doing that.
Well, Rachel, thanks so much for joining us. For those who might be struggling right now, what advice do you have for them?
The first thing I want to say is that these programs exist to help families put food on the table. Nobody should be embarrassed by relying on a program. So what we want people to know is, number one, you can reach out to a local community organization, your county social services department. Find out if you're eligible for SNAP. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings out there from people. That is a resource. Talk to your school district. Are they providing no-cost breakfast and lunch? Are they eligible to do so and chose not to? If that's the case, let's work together to make sure that they're providing those meals. There's also community organizations, emergency food providers, faith-based organizations and communities that are there to offer support. They're not there to judge. They're there to provide meals, to provide direction how to get support. So I encourage people to talk to those in their community to help get that support.
Just one quick follow-up. You mentioned that people often misunderstand SNAP benefits. Is there anything else on this subject that you feel people commonly misunderstand or get wrong, that they file wrong? Any myths about hunger and these resources that you'd like to dispel?
I think oftentimes there's some confusion about what programs exist and who is eligible for those. I've heard some people say, well, I have a job, so I'm not eligible for SNAP. No, it's based on income levels and other costs that families face in their budget. So it's worth talking to a community organization, talking to a SNAP enroller, see what benefits are out there. I think as we approach the new year, a tremendous resource for New Yorkers or eligible New Yorkers is VITA tax programs, which allow eligible New Yorkers to have their taxes done at no cost by IRS certified tax preparers. They'll work with them to make sure that they're applying for tax credits, that they're getting the deductions they need. But a lot of people don't know about that. So that's something that you can visit the New York State Department of Taxation website for. Look at local community organizations and see what's out there. I also think something that is also doesn't get the attention it needs is we consider summer the hungriest time of year. When school buildings are closed, where are people going to get those meals? So number one, if New York State opts into summer EBT, that will help eligible families with that grocery benefit to purchase those meals. But also there's summer meals programs. They're at parks, they're at pools, they're at schools. We have a texting line where people can send a message and find out the closest location for them. So I think so much of this is about awareness and making New Yorkers know that these programs are out there and they're there to support them.
That was Rachel Sabella, the executive director of No Kid Hungry New York, which is pushing Governor Kathy Hochul to include funding for the summer EBT program in her next budget. Hochul is expected to present her budget plan in January. Thanks for joining us for this week's 51%. 51% is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio in Albany, New York. It's produced and hosted by me, Jesse King. Our associate producer is Jody Cowan, and our theme is Lolita by the Albany-based artist Girl Blue. Just a reminder that you can listen to 51% anytime at WAMCpodcast.org or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can stay in the loop on all of WAMC's shows by signing up for our weekly newsletter, Airwaves, at WAMC.org. We hope you'll join us next week. Until then, I'm Jesse King for 51%.
I was every single girl, I was nobody else, I was so sure of myself. I was 15 and a half, he was a hollow laugh. And I lost my cool somewhere along the way. At night and down the hallway, I had to learn how to look away. I lost my cool, no electricity, hot rain on the concrete, sweet melting little girl dreams. They said, oh, I want a big life, not a house that could have been life. Where are you taking